hopefully you've been here with us across the Christmas season for the past 2 weeks. But if you have or you haven't, we're going to start tonight the way that we've started all Christmas season long. Here we go. Israel is in trouble again. It's a situation that they find themselves in often. I'll catch you up again if you haven't been here. But 2 weeks ago, we met a rich guy who happened to be pretty sad. Lots of money, lots of cash, had a wife, but what he didn't have was a son. He didn't have anybody to share that with, to pass that on to. But God shows up and promises him not just a son, promises him so many offspring that that son will turn into his very own nation. Let me be crystal clear. God did not say, I'm going to give you a really big family. God did not say you got to rent out, the Amelie Arena over here for your family reunions. God says, I'm going to give you a nation. And that's exactly what happened. God showed up. He gave the first of the sons that we've been talking about at Christmas, a kid named Isaac. And he brought so much joy to his parents that they named him Laughter. And they all lived happily. Wait, that's not true. Not yet, they didn't. That family did grow. That family did get to be a big crew. In fact, they did become a nation, but they became a nation in the wrong place. They were in Egypt, not the promised land. There were not hundreds of them. There were not thousands of them. Just even a simple reading, a surface level reading of the book of Exodus, there were hundreds of thousands of them, and that's just counting them in. Conservatively, we're looking at 1 to 2, maybe 2.5 million people in this family. That's a heck of a family reunion, 2.5 million. But God has done what he promised he would do. He gave Abraham, that old rich guy, a nation. But they caught the attention of a king, a bad guy who'd come to power. And when he looked out on this growing nation, he was so alarmed, he said, I'm going to wield everything at my disposal, at my power to subject you. I will throw you into slavery. I will formulate systems of genocide. I'm going to bring you to extinction if I can. Government. But God's not going to do that. God is going to introduce us to the second of the sons that we've been talking about during this Christmas season. The kid, Moses. Moses, who's going to show up right in the nick of time. Moses, who was drawn up out of the water. Moses, who's going to stand up to Pharaoh with God in front of him and the people behind him and say, let my people go. And so God uses Moses as this deliverer that we talked about last week to lead the people out of slavery, out of bondage, out of death, through the wilderness to the promised land. And then when they got to the promised land, they all lived happily. Yeah, not yet, actually. Sorry. I keep getting that wrong. Yeah, you would think that when they got to the promised land, that everything would just be peachy, hunky-dory, as we say down here in the South. But that's not what happens. They had enemies that they met along the way. There were enemies in the land because they didn't obey God. They had good old-fashioned sin in their hearts. Their favorite flavor was idolatry. They had met some idols down in Egypt. And so when they got into the promised land, they're unpacking their suitcases. They're setting them up on the shelf. They're setting them up on the mantle. They had learned some new gods along the way. And then when they got into the promised land, because they didn't kick out their neighbors, they just began to adopt some of their gods and their goddesses, their idolatries and so forth. And so there's plenty of crookedness, plenty of perversion, plenty of suffering going on. And so God just gives them over to their sin. He allows them to be oppressed and taken over by all those people that's right there around them. And they would cry out to God after their sin, Lord, save us, Lord, rescue us, Lord, deliver us. And God would raise up these guys that we talked about at dinner last night, judges. Not judges who wear a cloak and carry a gavel, but judges who wear armor and carry a sword. Warriors. Unfortunately, if you read the book of Judges, Carl said to me last night, he goes, I was like a grown man before I realized, like, Samson's not a good guy. And I'm like, exactly, which is why we spent 5 weeks talking about how not good of a guy he was earlier this year. But across all those judges, they systematically got worse until we get to that one Samson. But it's okay. It's okay. It's all good. Everybody relax. God has also gifted to his people priests and other spiritual leaders who are going to valiantly take the charge and help them lead godly. Okay, I'm kidding. These guys were as crooked as the day was long, okay? Many of these priests didn't care about God's people. They were in it for the money. They were unjust. They took bribes. They were selfish. They were arrogant. They were egotistical. They were in it for themselves. If we were just to take a snapshot, a picture, hit the timeout just for a second and say, if hope were a tank of gas right now, the nation of Israel would be coasting on fumes. I mean, like everything that could go wrong is basically going wrong for this nation. It's just this unending cycle of sin. Everything that's going wrong can be going wrong, is going wrong. And it's like the people of Israel saying, God, do you have another one of those nation-changing sons? God, is there another one of the little baby boys that you can send along our way that's going to step in the nick of time like Isaac or like Moses and help us out? God, is there somebody that you can send to us to help us? The answer is yes. God is going to send another baby boy, and he is going to absolutely change the nation. But before we meet him, God actually introduces us to a woman who is as hopeless and as helpless as the nation she belongs to. Her name is Hannah, and the son that she will give birth to is our third son we'll talk about this Christmas season. A little background on Hannah. My favorite book of the Old Testament is 1 Samuel, okay? So brace yourself. We may be here a while tonight, okay? Love the story of 1 Samuel. We meet Hannah. She's married to this guy named Elkanah. When it comes to Elkanah, let's just leave it at this, okay? He tried hard. God bless him, he tried hard, okay? Let's just be nice and move on, okay? Elkanah, he tried hard. Elkanah, interestingly enough, the interesting news is he's not just married to Hannah, he's also married to Peninnah. That's the interesting news. The bad news is that Hannah doesn't have any children, but Peninnah has lots of children. And the worst news, really almost unthinkable news for us today. Like this is, you gotta be dark-hearted and dark-souled to do this. But the worst news is that Peninnah, and probably others, maybe others, but Peninnah for sure taunted Hannah for being childless. You see, we're told in this opening chapter of the book of 1 Samuel, not once but twice, that the Lord had closed Hannah's womb. It was God's hand. The reason was God, that she didn't have any children. And then we're told that he grievously irritated her, that she grievously irritated, that she provoked Hannah. It's like you're telling me without telling me outright that God doesn't care about you, Hannah. If God really cared about you, you'd have children. But because you don't have any children, God doesn't care about you. I don't know if you've ever been the victim of bad theology in the past, okay? But this is an example of it right here. Poor Hannah has no children, and it goes from bad to worse. So Hannah suffered. She just cried a lot. She didn't eat very much, and she prayed as often as she could down at the tabernacle in Shiloh as often as she and Elkanah would come into town. And this went on for years and years and years until God said it was time. Until God just said it was time. See, Elkanah and Hannah had gone to Shiloh, and Hannah was doing what Hannah did best. She was just throwing herself at the altar, weeping before the Lord, crying and pouring her heart out to him, and speaking to him about wanting a son, wanting an heir, wanting a helper, wanting a companion, wanting someone that would take care of her after her husband died. Because you see, in Hannah's day, once the husband had passed away, it was the son's responsibility to take care of the mother, and without a son, what's going to happen to Hannah? And Hannah she was praying, and she was praying like a way that some of us sometimes pray, right? She's pouring her heart out to the Lord, and she's moving her mouth, but she's not actually making words come out, right? And it's not a problem. I mean, we get that. You and I, we do that, right? I mean, Hannah, Hannah doesn't need to actually speak her prayer out loud. She knows that the Lord can hear her heart. I mean, we're on the same page here, right? It works for Hannah. It works for me. It works for you. It does not work for Eli. Eli is one of the old guys there. He's as bad a priest as he is father. He's got some crooked and some corrupt sons who are going to be priests alongside of him, and they're messing everything up. And Eli, he can't really see all that well. He's old at this point. And he sees her there, and he begins to criticize her. He thinks she's drunk. He says, "Hey, lady, why don't you put down the bottle, huh? Why don't you clean yourself up? Why don't you come into the tabernacle here and act like you're supposed to?" I mean, really comes down, just piling on some more of that bad theology. And poor Hannah, she just goes, No, Lord, listen. You don't understand. I'm just crying out to the Lord out of my great anxiety, quote, great anxiety and vexation. I'm crying out to the Lord out of great anxiety and vexation. I'm not drunk. I'm just speaking to the Lord from a broken heart. And this is what Eli says. He goes, "All right, go your way. The Lord has heard your requests. The Lord will answer you." Eli doesn't know what she's praying for. Eli doesn't know what she's praying about. He just goes, "Lord's heard you. You're dismissed." And then the story of Hannah changes greatly when we come to 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 19 and 20. The Bible says this. They rose early in the morning. This is Elkanah and Hannah. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house in Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. Hannah had a son. And when Hannah had a son, finally had a son, Israel finally had some hope. Now, you see, if you don't know much about Samuel, shame on you, because 1 Samuel should also be your favorite book of the Old Testament too. We could start a club. But Samuel doesn't get as much press as Moses does. Samuel doesn't get as much coverage as Abraham or David, right? Or Peter. So he doesn't get a lot of press. So it might be that you don't know much about him. It might be that you're not super familiar with him, or like, why was he such a big deal? What did he do that affected so much change in the nation? How did he save the day? How did God use him to be such a blessing? Well, I'll tell you, he was the last judge of the nation of Israel. And he was such a good judge that he kind of redeemed the office from all those knuckleheads who had come before him. I'm looking at you, Samson. He also served his nation as the first prophet in the promised land. And he set a high bar for all those who would come after him, who would serve as prophets for the Lord as well. I'm looking at you, Jonah. Okay, he served the Lord as a military leader. He led successful campaigns against the perennial national enemy, the Philistines. He, more importantly, led by such a godly example that people had their faith reoriented towards the Lord. In fact, he was such a godly man. If you want to like chuckle at something in the Bible, read Samuel's farewell address in chapter 12 of this book. Like, I laugh when I read what he says to them after he has served them his whole life. And then Samuel instituted the monarchy. He was the one that God chose. He was the one that God chose to anoint David king over Israel. Now, it's not just Israel that's blessed by Samuel. Somebody else is blessed by Samuel's birth too. Who is it? Hannah, right? The mama. I mean, she's got companionship now. She's got a purpose. I mean, yeah, she's got to change dirty diapers, but every father can look past that because of the joy, the peace, the hope that this baby boy brings. And now she's got security. She's got companionship. She's got help. You know, when Samuel gets a little bit bigger, he's going to be able to open that pickle jar for mama, right? He's going to be there positioned to take care of her and finance her after dad is dead and gone. He's going to be there to save mama. He's going to be there to provide for mama. All these blessings, it must have been outrageous to finally have the answer to the prayer. I've been praying to God, trusting the Lord, hoping that he will give me a son. God does that, and that is what makes what happens next in the story that much more surprising. So I didn't tell you this part of the story earlier. But when Hannah was weeping and crying and praying to the Lord that day in Shiloh when Eli thought she was drunk, she said, if you will give me a son, watch this, if you will give me a son, God, I will give him back to you. He will live before you and serve you all of his days. I will see to it. So guess what Hannah does next? Let's look at the continuation of the story. And when she, Hannah, had weaned him, Samuel, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull and an ephah of flour and a skin of wine, and she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh, and the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli, and she said, "Oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord," talking to Eli, "I am the woman who was standing here in your presence praying to the Lord. And this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made it to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord." And he, Samuel, worshiped the Lord there. She gives birth to a baby boy. She grows him up, makes him a little, little clothing and everything, and gets him weaned, and then brings him back to Eli at Shiloh and goes, "Here's your helper. Here's your next little priest. Here's the guy that's going to be running around to help you. Here's your assistant. He can just hang out here for the rest of his days at Shiloh, serving the Lord alongside you, Eli." Let me just make sure you understand this, because now we've gotten to the meat of the matter. Hannah has been praying to God, crying out 4 years for one thing. She's been trusting the Lord, hoping in the Lord that the Lord would give her what? A son. And then when God gives her a son, what does she do with the son? She gives it back. You might be thinking, Pastor David, that's kind of a weird story. Like, that doesn't make much sense, because you said all these things were important about the relationship between Samuel and his mama Hannah. Like, what happens next? How will she be cared for? Did she give up the source of her joy and her peace and her hope when she gave up Samuel? Good question. Glad you asked it. No. Let me show you the most important thing from the story right here. This is what I want you to know on the screen. That hope comes from continually trusting God. Hope comes from trusting God forever, continually, without end. Don't stop. That's what Hannah did. She didn't stop trusting in God the moment that she had this baby boy. She continually prayed. She had continually turned to the Lord. She had continually trusted in God. Then she gets a baby boy. Guess what she does? She continues to trust. She continues to seek the Lord. She continues to trust God. She refused to replace God with Samuel. You get that? She was not going to replace in her heart her God with her baby boy. Just going to leave that there. So if you want to have hope, if you want to have a secure hope, here's where the rubber meets the road for us tonight, is you are going to have to continually trust in the Lord as well. Now, I'll be the salesman in the room. You have some options, okay? You can trust in others. Most of us know how that goes sometimes. I swear I'll be at the airport to pick you up at 11:58. No. You can trust in money, but all of us know stories where money just is not a big enough answer to the problem. Like, millionaires with cancer die all the time. You can put your trust in the worst place you could put it of all, yourself. The problem with that is you lie to you more than anybody else lies to you. You break promises to you more often than anybody else breaks promises to you. You know about that? Yep. Yep. We lie, we mistreat, we abuse, we break promises to ourselves. So I wouldn't suggest any of that. I'm saying that if you want to have hope, you need to continually trust God. And the continually part, well, that's the key, right? I want to say something. I've been struggling with this. I've been wrestling with this. I'm going to make a statement, and we can argue about it in the parking lot afterwards if you need to. But here's what I'm going to say. Answered prayer, it raises a question in our minds and our hearts that I don't think we ponder enough. See, when God, here's the question, and I'll state it as succinctly and as clearly as I can. When God provides that very thing that you needed, that extra bit of money, that good diagnosis from the doctor, a wife or a husband, a son, just a good report card, whatever it may be, okay? When God gives you that, when God does that for you, here's the question. What do you do with God? What do you do with God? See, I have some questions. And my question is not, oh, could you tell me about that moment? I love you. I don't really care. As your pastor, I don't not care about that moment. Here's what I care about more. The moment after that. And the moment after that moment. And then the week after that. And the month after that. And the year after that. And the decade after that. I want to know that when God gave, did you take and put your trust and your hope in that thing that he gave, or are you still trusting God continually? I'm going to say it this way. You can argue. I'm going to put it bluntly. I'm going to put it bluntly. Hannah let go of a baby so that she could hold on to God. Okay? She did not hold on to a baby so that she couldn't hold on to God. Do you understand that? That's what Hannah was willing to do. I'm simply asking you, are you willing to do that? See, guys, again, we've got our options. We've got our alternatives. We are in situations just like Hannah all the time. We need God to show up. We need God to do something. We need God to bless. We need God to move a mountain. Again, when he does that, my question is, what do you do in the moments after that, the days after that, the weeks after that, the years after that? What do you do? Are you so satisfied in the gift that the giver has given that you just focus on the gift instead of the giver himself? Just asking the questions. Only you know the answers, okay? So when God does this, when God shows up and he gives these miraculous answers to prayer, when God shows up and he does the thing that we needed God to do, that we said, only God, you can do this. What do we do for him? How do we treat him? What's our next move with him? Let me play this out for you really quickly. Let's say that tonight you're sitting here and you've been talking to some doctors and it ain't been going your way. My question to you is, if you're a follower of Jesus, you claim to be a follower of Jesus, and God heals you tonight. We pray, we lay hands on you, we anoint you with oil. God heals you tonight. Will you so passionately and zealously follow Jesus tomorrow, the next day, the next day, the next day? Can I speak to my crowd over here just for a second? Love you guys. Some of us in this room, we're fighting for sobriety. We've never been sober for more than 6 days. Maybe you got 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years or 2 decades. I don't know. But when God gives you the thing that has eluded your grasp all of your life, God grants you sobriety. Will you continue to trust him? Will you continue to pursue him? Will you continue to chase after him? Or will you just be satisfied with sobriety and nothing else from the Lord? Let's just get real spiritual, shall we? Let's just get real spiritual. Let's say you're sitting here tonight and you're not a follower of Jesus. And you know that, man, I sound like this group of people, the Israelites, man, always in sin, always messing up, always kind of aborting myself and hijacking my own plans and getting in my way. Like, I know that I am my own worst enemy. I know that I lie to myself. I break my promises. I break God's heart. It's true of you. You're a sinner. And tonight, you meet Jesus. Tonight, you realize that his son Jesus, came to earth from heaven to die on a cross, but not any cross, your cross, to pay the price for your sin. I'm just asking you, he sets you free from your sin tonight. Will you be faithful to him in the moments, in the days, the weeks, and the years to come? Now, I realize that this might sound absolutely ridiculous to you that I would raise this question. Pastor David, how in the world, if God does this awesome, marvelous, wonderful thing, of course we're going to do what Hannah did. Really? Have you read the book of Galatians? Because I have. I don't know if you've ever read the book of Galatians. There's a video, a very helpful video on a YouTube channel that you can learn all about Galatians in 6 minutes, I hear. But let me just tell you, in case you've never read the book of Galatians, you can read it in about 25 minutes. I encourage you to do that tonight. But if you have never read Galatians and you are going to read it tonight, be sitting down, because the book of Galatians is the biggest spiritual spanking in all of God's word. There's some pretty harsh language in it. Okay, Paul, the apostle, is writing this letter, pretty short letter, to a group of churches in Galatia. Y'all know where Galatia is, right? Yeah, we call it Turkey today. And these churches, not moose clubs, not the Elks Lodge, not the Mormons, not the Muslims. He's writing a letter to the churches of Galatia, and he's torching them because they have received Jesus. They've been set free of their sin by Christ, and now they're moving on and leaving Jesus behind. They realized that Jesus did something amazing in their life, and they were thankful for about 12 minutes, and then they took and began to be the leader of their lives again. They started off with Jesus. Because he's the one who gives us forgiveness and peace and hope and eternal life. But then, let's just start trusting in ourselves again. That's what the Galatians are doing. And so Paul says this in the book of Galatians, chapter 3. I think it'll be on the screen here. Oh, there we go. You wonderful, lovely, terrific friends of mine, Galatians. No, that's not what it says, is it? You foolish Galatians. Who has bewitched you? Who has deceived you? Who has lied to you and taken your attention off of Jesus? It was before your very eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified. So let me ask you only this. Did you receive the Spirit by works of the law or by hearing with faith? The right answer is hearing by faith. You didn't save you. I didn't save me. Carl didn't save himself. Iggy didn't save himself. All of us are in the same boat with holes in the bottom of it. We need somebody to rescue us. And Paul says, you started by the Spirit. You didn't trust the law. You didn't trust yourself. You didn't trust your own goodness, your own strength. You needed God to show up, and God showed up. But now, what are you doing? Are you so foolish, he continues? Have you begun by the Spirit and are now being perfected by the flesh, by your own mind, your own hands, your own works, your own heart, your own talents? Give me a break, you foolish Galatians. Let me just tell you something. Hannah received a son, and she gave him right back to God just because she promised. She didn't do it just because she promised. She did it because, well, that baby, I love him. He looks like he's cute. Oh my gosh, you should see the Christmas cards we're going to send. It's going to be amazing, right? No. She gave the baby back so that she would continue. Nothing would distract her hope and her trust in her God. You and I, these Galatians, God sends Jesus to die on a cross for us. We start off with him. He gives a great gift. But are we going to take an answered prayer, an answer to prayer, and be satisfied in only that? or are we going to continue to trust God? What's next? God, who will you be for me tomorrow? What are you calling me to next week? The Galatians had moved on from Jesus. Let me just tell you something crystal clear. When you move on from Jesus, you move into error. There has never been a moment that you haven't needed Jesus. There will never be a moment that you don't need Jesus. So trust him continually, and your hope will be secure. Let me pray for you.